Grandpa gave me money to start my dream business. The next day, my parents demanded rent and forced me to bail out my brother. On my 18th birthday, my grandpa gave me a gift that completely changed my life. He handed me a substantial amount of money, enough to finally kickstart my dream business. I had always wanted to launch a custom stationery and office supplies brand, offering everything from personalized planners to branded office kits. I had been toying with the idea for a while, but I really started diving into it around 2020, mostly because I had a lot of free time on my hands. Stationery and graphic design had always been passions of mine, and I had already started a small online business, but I wanted to take it further, turn it into something sustainable, something I could actually live off of. I saw the potential, especially with small businesses constantly looking for affordable, customized products. I had my vision mapped out, suppliers researched, and even a few sample designs ready to go. That money from Grandpa was the final push I needed to bring my idea to life. But things didn't unfold the way I had hoped. Around that time, my older brother, who was 31, had been out of work for nearly 2 years. He bounced from one job to another, but nothing ever lasted. And, if I'm being honest, it was no mystery why. My brother just couldn't follow rules to save his life. He'd sleep in, miss work without letting anyone know, and generally act like responsibilities didn't apply to him. On top of that, he had dropped out of college and never really got his act together. His life had been one bad decision after another, and through it all, my parents kept bailing him out. They covered his bills, bought him whatever he needed, and let him live at home without any expectations. He was 26 at the time, still completely dependent on them, and had zero motivation to change. It was frustrating watching him waste every opportunity while my parents made excuse after excuse for him. They always said he was just going through a rough patch and that he'd get back on track soon. But that rough patch had been dragging on for over a decade. I had been witnessing the same cycle since he turned 16. Then my parents found out about my birthday gift, and everything shifted. Suddenly, they wouldn't stop pressuring me to loan my brother the entire sum. According to them, he was struggling with overdue bills and was on the verge of being evicted. Every time I said no, they piled on the guilt, making me feel like the worst person alive. They called me selfish, told me I was turning my back on family, and insisted that helping him was my responsibility. Eventually, I gave in. Not because I thought it was the right thing to do, but because the constant guilt became too much to bear. I convinced myself that my brother would pay me back soon and that I'd still have time to build my business. The next morning, I woke up thinking maybe I'd done a good thing. Maybe helping him out would be worth it in the long run. But before I even had a chance to feel good about my decision, my parents hit me with another bombshell. They told me I needed to start paying them $2,000 a month in rent. Apparently, turning 18 meant I was suddenly responsible for contributing to the household, even though I was still in school, didn't have a job, and had just handed over every penny of my startup fund to my brother. It felt like punishment for doing exactly what they had wanted. That was when it all clicked. They never cared about my dreams or ambitions. To them, I was just a means to an end, a way to fix my brother's mess. I packed my things and left that same week. I knew I couldn't keep living like that, constantly being used as a backup plan for other people's failures. From that day forward, I cut off all contact with my parents and brother. The next few years weren't easy. I had to take on whatever jobs I could find while slowly building my business from the ground up, all while juggling college at the same time. I designed logos, created custom planners, and put together office kits. Little by little, I started attracting small businesses that needed my products. Things took off quicker than I expected. By the second year, I had opened a small storefront, and by year 5, I had 2 locations and a thriving online presence. Then, out of nowhere, my parents reached out. I hadn't spoken to them in years, so I was immediately suspicious. At first, they were vague about why they wanted to talk. But after a bit of pushing, they finally admitted the truth: my brother was in serious trouble. They didn't give me the full story, but from what I could piece together, he had racked up a ton of gambling debt, failed at yet another business venture, and possibly gotten involved in something illegal. They were desperate for help. They even offered to pay me back double the amount I had loaned him years ago if I agreed to step in and fix things. But the way they said it made it clear that this wasn't just about money. They wanted me to use my business connections to pull some strings and get him a job, hoping that my network could save him from whatever mess he had gotten himself into. I couldn't believe it. After all these years, after everything they had done, they still only reached out when they needed something from me. They didn't call to check in, congratulate me on my success, or even acknowledge what I had built for myself. The only reason they wanted to talk now was because they needed me to clean up my brother's mess again. I was furious. But more than that, I was just sad. It confirmed what I had already known deep down: nothing had changed. My parents still only cared about my brother, and I was still just a resource to be used whenever things got bad. I thought about their request. Really thought about it. Could I help my brother? Honestly, yes. With the connections I had built over the years, I probably could have found him a job or an opportunity to get back on his feet. But the more I considered it, the angrier I became. He never once tried to make things right with me. Never acknowledged the fact that he had essentially stolen from me. And instead of coming to me himself, he had our parents do it for him, just like always. I realized that if I gave in now, I'd be repeating history. I'd be setting myself on fire just to keep them warm. So I told them no. I wasn't going to sacrifice everything I had worked for just to bail out my brother. Not again. My brother made his choices, and I wasn't about to take responsibility for them. But, of course, my parents didn't see it that way. They launched into another guilt trip, harping on about how family helps family and how, since I was doing well now, I could easily afford to step in. But I didn't budge. I had worked too damn hard to build my life, and I wasn't about to let them drag me back into their never-ending drama. I didn't owe them anything, not after the way they treated me. It's been a week since I shut them down, and they've gone completely silent. At first, I felt sure of my decision. But as the days passed, doubt started creeping in. I know, logically, that I don't owe them a thing. Still, a small part of me feels guilty for refusing to help. I mean, he's still my brother. And even though I swore I wouldn't let them manipulate me this time, the weight of it has been pressing on me, making me question everything. I guess I just need someone to tell me I'm not wrong. That I'm not a terrible person for refusing to help them after what they did to me all those years ago. Update 1, 3 weeks later. Hey, everyone, I'm back with an update. It's been 3 weeks since my last post, and I've had a lot of time to think. First off, I just want to say I appreciate all the responses, even the ones that challenged my decision. They made me reflect on things in ways I hadn't before. A lot of you had questions, so let me clear a few things up before I get into what's happened since. Some people asked if my parents outright asked me for money. No, not exactly. They didn't come right out and say, "Give us cash." But what they did ask for was arguably worse. They wanted me to use my business connections to help my brother. From what I've gathered, his problems run much deeper than I initially thought. My parents were, as usual, vague, but I pieced together enough to know that he's in serious debt, way beyond something that could be solved by just throwing money at it. Their brilliant plan? Have me use my professional network to somehow fix his situation. Which, let's be real, was just another way of trying to drag me back into his mess. Another common question was whether I ever felt guilty for cutting him off or if I missed him. Honestly? In the beginning, yeah. It was tough. I spent a long time wondering if I was heartless for walking away from my family. But the more time passed, the more I realized that staying in contact only meant continuing the cycle of me giving and them taking. And as for missing my brother? Not really. Our relationship had always been one-sided. And lastly, a lot of you wanted to know why I gave him the money in the first place. Trust me, I ask myself the same thing sometimes. But you have to understand, I was just 18. Still in high school. Still living under my parents' roof. The moment they found out about my birthday gift, they didn't give me a second to breathe. To this day, I don't even know how they knew about it, but from morning to night, it was all they talked about. They guilted me, pressured me, and wore me down until I finally gave in. I did manage to keep a small portion of what Grandpa gave me, but most of it went straight to my brother. Not because I wanted to help, but because I couldn't take the constant manipulation anymore. Now, here's what's happened recently. After my parents reached out, they went silent for about a week. I assumed they finally given up and found someone else to bail my brother out. Then, out of nowhere, they invited me to dinner. At first, I didn't know what to do. A part of me thought maybe, just maybe, this could bring closure. Maybe seeing them in person would help me put everything behind me once and for all. But I also knew there was a good chance it was just another setup. In the end, I went. Not because I wanted to help, but because I needed to see, with my own eyes, if anything had actually changed. Spoiler alert, it hadn't. They chose a restaurant instead of their house, which was odd because my parents always insisted on hosting things at home. When I arrived, they were already seated, smiling a little too much, acting a little too happy to see me. The whole thing felt off. Like they were putting on a show. At first, it was fine. We made small talk, kept things light. And for a brief moment, I let myself believe, just for a second, that maybe they actually wanted to reconnect, no strings attached. That illusion didn't last long. Halfway through dinner, they finally got to the point. They weren't asking for money, but they wanted me to use my success to help my brother. Since my business had connections with investors and people in the financial world, they figured I could introduce him to someone who could sort things out. So, yeah, maybe it wasn't a direct request for cash, but it was still a favor I had no interest in doing. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, my brother showed up. They never mentioned he'd be there, but suddenly, he waltzed in like he owned the place, all smug and self-important. And the second he sat down, I knew nothing about him had changed. He was still the same arrogant, entitled person he had always been. Loud, overconfident, completely unapologetic about the mess he'd created. And the worst part? He actually acted like I owed him. He had the audacity to suggest that since I was so lucky with my business, it was only fair that I helped him out. Like I should be grateful for the opportunity to do something good for him. And if that wasn't bad enough, he even made a snide remark about how my business wouldn't have taken off if I hadn't given him that money back then. Let that sink in. He actually believed that his failures somehow contributed to my success. I wanted to get up and walk out right then and there. But instead, I just sat there, staring at him, letting it all sink in. And in that moment, something clicked. Nothing had changed. My parents were still enabling him. He was still the same selfish, entitled mess he had always been. They hadn't invited me to reconnect, to mend things, to acknowledge how far I had come. No, they only reached out because they saw me as a solution to a problem they didn't want to deal with. After dinner, I went straight home and blocked all their numbers. And you know what? I thought I'd feel guilty. But I don't. For the first time in a long time, I feel free. I know, without a doubt, that I made the right decision. And that's where things stand. I'm done. For good this time. With everything that's happened, you'd think I'd feel conflicted. But honestly? I don't. For the first time in a long time, I feel at peace with my decision. Some people might say I'm being too harsh, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that setting boundaries is necessary, especially when it comes to family. For once, I'm putting myself first. And damn, it feels good. I'll update if anything changes, but for now, I'm moving forward with my life. Thanks again to everyone who gave advice, it really helped me see things clearly. Update 2, 6 months later. I really thought I had closed the door on this mess. I blocked my parents, cut off contact, and finally felt like I could breathe again. But apparently, my family isn't ready to let go. Since shutting them out, I've started getting messages from extended relatives, some aunts, uncles, cousins, telling me how cold and heartless I am for abandoning my brother when he needed me the most. A few even had the nerve to say I'd forgotten where I came from now that I've found success. And the funniest part? Not a single one of them stepped up to help him themselves. At first, I ignored the messages, hoping they'd eventually drop it. But the guilt started creeping in again. I couldn't shake this nagging thought, what if his situation was worse than I realized? So, against my better judgment, I unblocked my parents. I wanted to hear the full story, to get some clarity. What I found out was worse than I ever imagined. It turns out my brother has racked up over $90,000 in debt, most of it from gambling and shady personal loans. When I heard that number, I was floored. This wasn't just a string of bad luck. This was disaster-level stupidity. And then came the part that made my blood boil. That money I gave him when I was 18? The money my parents guilted me into handing over because he was behind on bills and needed help to avoid eviction? He never used it for rent. He gambled it away. And if that wasn't bad enough, the rest of it was dumped into some half-baked business scheme that crashed before it even got off the ground. I had spent all these years thinking, at the very least, that money kept a roof over his head for a while. But no, he threw it away like it meant nothing. My parents, of course, tried to brush it off. Everyone makes mistakes, they said. Family sticks together. I wasn't having it. I reminded them about the money they promised me, the so-called double repayment if I helped him out. That could have at least put a dent in his debt, right? That's when the next bombshell dropped. They never had the money. The whole thing was a lie, just a ploy to get me to step in. Whether it was my own cash or my business connections, they didn't care. They were never planning to help him themselves. They just wanted me to fix everything for them. I was beyond furious. Not only had they manipulated me again, but they were still trying to dump the responsibility onto me like it was my job to clean up his mess. Of course, I told them no. And, like clockwork, they lost it. I was selfish. I was cruel. I needed to remember the importance of family. The same tired lines they'd been using for years. Then, when that didn't work, they turned the rest of the family against me. Suddenly, I was getting bombarded with messages from cousins and relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Asterisk, you're successful now, it wouldn't kill you to help him out. Asterisk, he's your brother. Aren't you ashamed of turning your back on him? It was exhausting. At that point, I realized something. I didn't just need boundaries with my parents and brother, I needed them with everyone. So I responded. Not with anger, not with explanations, just a simple fact. If you're so concerned about my brother, you step up and help him. Silence. Not a single one of them had anything to say after that. The messages stopped, and they all conveniently faded into the background again. That was the moment I saw it clearly. None of them actually cared about helping him. They just wanted to guilt me into doing it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I kept replaying everything, how they forced me to give up my money at 18, how they turned around and demanded rent the very next day. And then it hit me. The only reason they wanted me to pay rent? They were probably just funneling more money to my brother. They were using me. My dreams, my hard work, my success, it all meant nothing to them. I was just another resource to keep my brother afloat. I wish things had been different. I wish my parents had cared about me the way they did about him. But I've accepted that some relationships can't be fixed. If they ever truly want to reconnect, it's going to have to come from a place of respect, not manipulation. But for now, I'm done. I refuse to let guilt or family pressure pull me back into their mess. Thanks again to everyone who shared their thoughts and advice. Your support has helped me stay strong through all of this. If anything major happens, I'll post another update. But for now, I'm moving forward. And I'm not looking back. Update 3. I thought I was finally at the end of this nightmare. I blocked my parents and brother again, thinking that would be the final straw. But nope. Apparently, they weren't done dragging me into their chaos. This time, they've escalated things in the most ridiculous way imaginable. They're threatening to take legal action against me. Yep, you read that right. My own parents are now threatening to sue me for ruining the family. You might be wondering, how the hell did it get to this point? Well, buckle up. I recently found out that my brother's situation has somehow gotten even worse. And I didn't even think that was possible. Apparently, he's not just drowning in credit card debt or overdue bills anymore, he's in deep with loan sharks. And these aren't the kind of people who send friendly reminders. From what I've heard through mutual contacts, these are serious people who don't play games when it comes to collecting debts. And now, he owes them tens of thousands of dollars. So, naturally, my parents are panicking. But instead of holding my brother accountable, they've decided this is somehow my fault. They found another number and started texting me again. Every message was the same guilt-ridden nonsense. Asterisk, you're turning your back on family. Asterisk, you have the money, why won't you help? Asterisk, you're the reason this family is falling apart. And now, they're threatening legal action. I don't even know what to say at this point. I knew they were manipulative. I knew they didn't respect me. But suing me? This is beyond anything I ever expected. I'll update again when I figure out what to do next. But for now, I just feel numb. At first, I thought they were bluffing. The idea that my own parents would try to sue me for breaking the family bond and causing them emotional distress was so ridiculous that I almost laughed. I mean, what judge in their right mind would look at this situation and say, yep, your daughter, who refused to pay off her gambling-addicted brother's debts, is clearly responsible. But as the messages kept rolling in, that uneasy feeling started creeping back in. What if they actually tried? What if they dragged me to court just to make my life miserable, even knowing they had no case? I wasn't going to take any chances. So, I reached out to a lawyer. And, thankfully, they reassured me I had nothing to worry about. They explained that my parents and brother had zero legal ground to sue me. I wasn't financially responsible for my brother's reckless choices and emotional damages in a situation like this? Laughable. Cases like these rarely even make it to court, let alone hold up. The lawyer also told me I had been smart to block them. They strongly advised me to do it again, and this time, for good. No second chances. No leaving the door cracked open for them to squeeze through. They also suggested I document everything, every call, every text, just in case things escalated into harassment. Knowing I was legally protected was a huge relief. But that didn't make the situation any less exhausting. No matter how many times I shut them out, my parents always found another way to try and drag me back into their mess. And what infuriates me the most? The sheer entitlement of it all. They actually believe it's reasonable to blame me, someone they've mistreated for years, for the fact that my grown brother gambled his life away. And what stings even more? Instead of trying to make things right, they doubled down. No accountability. No apologies. Just more manipulation, more lies, and now, even legal threats. Because in their minds, it's easier to scapegoat me than to accept reality. I feel angry. I feel drained. And I keep asking myself, how did it even get to this point? But deep down, I already know. This is who they've always been, people who expect me to fix everything while giving nothing in return. And that's the reality I have to accept. I don't know if there will be another update. Honestly, I hope this is the end of it. But if anything major happens, I'll let you all know. For now, I'm closing this chapter. I'm moving forward. And I'm not looking back. Final update, the rock bottom I saw coming. It's been a month since my last update. And just when I thought this nightmare couldn't possibly get worse, it did. I found out, through a mutual friend, that my brother has landed himself in serious legal trouble. This time, it's criminal. Apparently, he's under investigation for fraud. From what I've pieced together, after racking up insane debt with loan sharks and gambling away every last cent, he got desperate. And desperate people do stupid things. It looks like he got caught up in some shady scam, thinking it would be a quick way to fix his mess. But instead of fixing anything, he just dug himself deeper, and now the police are involved. If he's convicted, he could face jail time. I always knew he was reckless. But I never imagined he'd let things spiral this far. And unfortunately, he's not the only one paying the price. Because now, my parents are facing eviction. Turns out, they weren't just covering for him with spare cash. They spent years taking out loans and refinancing their home, all to bail him out. I'm guessing every time he hit a new low, they took on more debt, convinced that this time he'd finally change. But now, they're drowning. And with nowhere left to turn, they're about to lose the house. Even after I cut them off completely, they still managed to get a message to me through a relative. This time, they weren't asking for money outright. Instead, they wanted me to use my connections to help them find a place to stay or fight the eviction. And you know what? I hate that it's come to this. No matter what they've done, they're still my parents. And I don't wish homelessness on anyone. But at the same time, I can't get involved. I warned them, time and time again, that enabling my brother would destroy them. I begged them to stop sacrificing everything for him. But they chose to ignore me. And now, they're facing the consequences of their own choices. It sounds harsh, but the truth is, this isn't my responsibility. And the fact that, even now, they still expect me to fix it for them just proves that nothing has changed. They haven't learned. And they probably never will. My brother has always been their number one priority. And no matter how far he's fallen, they still expect me to clean up after him. I won't do it. Do I feel sad for them? Of course. It's impossible not to. Hearing that my parents are about to lose their home hurts, no matter how much pain they've caused me. But at the same time, I know helping them now would only drag me right back into the same toxic cycle. They'd keep depending on me, keep guilting me, keep pushing me to rescue my brother every time he screws up. And that's not a burden I'm willing to carry. The hardest part of all of this has been sticking to my decision. There's always that little voice in the back of my mind whispering, am I being too harsh? Too cold? But then I remind myself I did everything I could for them. And none of it ever made a difference. They made their choices. And I made mine. To make sure no more messages get through, I've also cut off the relative who passed along their plea. I know they probably meant well, but I don't need a middleman trying to guilt me into caving. For those wondering, I did some digging, and the fraud case against my brother is serious. The police have been building their case for months, and from what I've heard, it's not looking good for him. Whether or not he actually goes to jail remains to be seen. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that's where this all ends. And at this point, I don't feel sorry for him anymore. He's had countless chances to turn his life around. And he wasted every single one of them. Right now, I'm focusing on one thing, protecting my peace. This whole experience has been mentally draining, and I think I'm long overdue for a break. To everyone who has supported me through this, thank you. This will likely be my final update because I've decided to fully cut ties with everyone involved. I'm moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I feel free.